Hey, my name's Zach, and today we are going to be talking about the color page in Davinci Resolve, and I am super excited to share this with you. And as always, the timestamps are on screen as well as in the description. Listen to the content for a little while, and if you feel like I have shared something that you have taken away from this, please consider subscribing. I really appreciate that. So let's get into this. So what I'd like to do first is actually show you what I did, and then I'm going to go back and recreate each of these items. So you can see here in the timeline, I've got 4 video clips. You can see each of these video clips have a color adjustment on them. They're each pretty different. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go over to the color page, which is this right here. And we're going to take a look at these 4 clips. Just like on the edit page, you have a timeline viewer. You also have the icons on the top, on the left and the right, similar to the other pages. Then you have all this stuff down here that's just jam-packed with buttons and numbers and wheels, and it is a little intimidating. So we'll go through this slowly. We'll start on the top left again, like the other pages, and we're going to go clockwise. So up here you have your gallery. And what this is when you start creating grades, which we'll get into in a little bit over here, it will be helpful to save those grades for potentially using on future clips. And those grades end up over here. You have your LUTS. LUTS stands for lookup tables, and essentially what this is a combination of adjustments that have been turned into a file, similar to what you see here on the gallery. And these are cool because essentially you can create a lookup table or a LUT, and you can color correct your image, and you can drag a LUT on top of the image, and it automatically creates a new look for you, a new color adjustment. So then you have the media pool, which is just like the other pages. You're just seeing the media that's in your project. So on the other side over here, you have your timeline. So you can actually see the clips as we saw them in the timeline on the edit page. You can see the 4 clips and then the 3 larger clips. You can see those right here, 4 smaller and then the 3 larger ones. You can turn that off if you don't need to use it. You have your clips, which are these right here. You can actually see an image of each one in your timeline. So just think about it this way. The timeline is what's actually on the timeline, and these clips are essentially your thumbnail so you can see what those clips are. Each one of these represents the rectangle that's on your timeline. Definitely either turn these on or off, whatever works best for you. I like at least having the clips on because then I can see quickly what is in my timeline. You can use this too, or you can turn it off. You have your nodes, and this is the cool thing about the color in the Fusion page, which we're going to talk about very soon. So you have your nodes, and then you have the effects, which these are all the different things you can do to your images. And then you also have Lightbox. So let me turn this off, turn off effects. We're going to keep nodes on. Now we're going to move down here to the bottom. These are the things, because there's so much going on here, I'm going to essentially tell you what I feel is the most important items to focus on when you're just getting into color correction or color grading. So on the bottom right, this scope is essentially showing you what is happening in this image. So if you look right here, the really bright parts, you can see the waterfall, that's representative of that. And then where it gets kind of dark down here, you can see the darker areas of the tree. And you can see a little bit of color. A lot of it is white, but you can see a little bit of green, a little bit of blue, a little bit of red. And now you can see in this next box over here, we have all these icons up here, which are different tools you can use, and you can go through them. You have curves, you have this thing called a color warper, you have a qualifier, you have a window, you can create a window, different types of windows. We'll talk about those later. You have a tracker, blur, and all these other things. And then these icons down here are different types of tools within those tools, which just this page is so crazy. And the fact that you can use this for free is just amazing. But now you have this last little area over here. Now, this area is what I would say is where you're going to be spending the most time on this page. This is called your primary color wheels. A lot of programs are layer-based. With Fusion and with the color page, it's a node-based system. So with nodes, you have individual nodes that you can create an adjustment on. And essentially, this right here is your input, which is this right here, the clip that we're selected on right now. If I go back to my timeline, it's the first clip. these can get pretty complex. I'm going to come over to this third one over here. If I hit Alt-S, I'm going to create a serial node. What a serial node is, just one node after the next, after the next, after the next, after the next. The best way to describe this is your first node, from there, it's going to flow down until you get to your media out. If you look close to the node, you can see there's some little icons on it. What that's showing you is that there's adjustments made to this node. So I want to show you what I did to it to get it to the state that it's in now. There are some icons on here that are showing adjustments I've already made. If I go in here and I hit Control D, it turns off the adjustments. To be honest with you, I'm pretty sure that this image was already color corrected when I got it. It's just some free stock footage that I found. And it, there's good contrast. It's not completely blown out, but it's pretty hot on the top in the white areas, and the black areas go all the way down to the bottom. The way you would look at this scope right here, 0 is completely black and 1023 would be completely white. Beyond that is blown out. If you ever heard that term before, blown out. And anything below 0 is completely black. So I think the goal is to really keep your footage in between the 0 and the 1023. I'm going to turn this back on. I'm going to hit Command D, and I'm going to come down here to my primary color wheels. And what I felt that this image needed, even though really I could have left this alone and it would be perfectly fine, is it needed a little more contrast. So you can see if I hit this button, it'll reset. So if you ever see in different areas of Davinci Resolve, if you see a little like arrow with a circle and there's a plus in the middle, that means to reset that particular area of tools. So I'm going to hit reset on this. Now we have a completely blank node. If I look at this, you have your lift, gamma, and gain. Your lift is the black area, the darker area, the lower areas. Your gamma, which is your mid area, and then you have your gain, which is your upper brights area. So if I drag this to the left, which is down, you can see on the right side that these all went down. And now look at the image. So I'm just turning that on and off. Obviously, we don't want this low. We want the highlights. And I'm just going to undo this and turn it off. We like them where they are. I think that looks fine. Sometimes it's hard to find a good starting place, but I think for me personally, what I like to do is to start with my white balance. So I want to make sure that this image is balanced correctly in regards to the color. So if you come down here to the bottom left, there's a little white dropper, which is called white balance. So if you click that, and this isn't always 100% the way to go, but this is a quick and easy way to do it. So if you have white in your image, you can go to it and click it, and then you'll see that these temperatures in the tint change just a little bit. And what this is doing is this is taking the waterfall that should be pure white, and then it's adjusting these to that so that this white is pure white. You can see it's very, very subtle. So I'm going to make this fit full screen. And now I'm going to come to the contrast. Now, it probably won't need a lot of contrast, but I'm going to turn the contrast up just a little bit. And you can see, if you look at the vector scope, it essentially stretches the image and it's adding that contrast. So like, this is like way too much contrast. And to me, this doesn't look good. Maybe if you're going for very stylized look, it could be the way to go, but I'm okay with the way it is now. I might just take it up just a touch. And that's the thing too with color grading, with things you do to videos, especially when it comes to audio. A lot of these things, what you're doing is very, very subtle, but it's the combination of all that you do to it that create, a beautiful image or a wonderful sounding recording, etc. I want to talk a little bit about this mid/detail. Essentially, if you pull it to the right, it sharpens the image. And if you pull it to the left, it softens the image. Let's say I want more blue in the highlights. I can take this little dot and I can click and drag it to the blue area. And now this doesn't look good, but this is what you could do with it. I'm going to undo that. And let's say I wanted more orange or more warmth in the shadows. I could drag this to the left, and that's essentially what happens. This is just affecting the luminance or the brightness of the image. And the combination of all these, you can really, really do a lot. So we kind of have a basic idea of what's going on in here and what to be looking for, what you're going to do to adjust your image. Now we're going to look at this page. This image is a bit different from the previous one. This image at the beginning was very much unfinished. So I'm going to turn all these off. I selected all of the nodes. I'm going to hit Command D, and you can see this image is dark. It's kind of a grayish color. There's not a lot of contrast in it, and you can pretty much turn it into wherever you want. If I turn this node on, there's nothing on it. You can see there's no little icons. One cool thing I want to mention real quick is if you look at these boxes, they show the number, the clip itself, its number. And if you have the color around the box, that means that there has been some sort of color adjustment made to this particular node. Because of that, it changes color. Now, like this one, it's back to nothing. There's no color around that box. You're going to want to take this image, and there's a color space that it's supposed to be in. Now, this color space in particular, if I turn this on, if I open up the effects over here on the top right, you can see the color space is from a video Gen 5. And then I actually was not sure of the input gamma, so I just set it to Davinci Intermediate, and I was pleased with the result. And then the color space that you usually see on YouTube, on TV, etc., right now is called Rec 709. So let me turn that off. So that's just one small adjustment to this image, and it's already made a pretty decent difference. Now, where do we go from here? Well, I did some more primary adjustments, so I'm going to turn this on. You can see down here I added some contrast. I adjusted the pivot a little bit. These numbers are adjusted. So the black is just above 0, and it's not quite all the way up to the full brightness, but I think when I did this, I found that if I did that, it just seems a little too bright. So I wanted it to be a little more contrasty. So in adjustment 2, I brought the mid-tone detail down a little bit. So I'm going to turn it on and off, and you can see if you look in this area, the focus gets a little bit softer. So there's off and there's on, off and on. And that just softens it just a little bit more. Now on these last 2 parallel nodes, I did a white balance, which before I said you probably should do it at first. So I think there are multiple ways of doing this, and I don't know that there is one particular way to color grade. And if you are a color grader, please leave a comment down below and let me know. I would be happy to do these in the correct order in the future. I'm going to open up the white balance. I'm going to turn that on. And what I found is that it's got a lot of magenta in here, and it's kind of toward the red area. So I kind of brought that back a little bit, and it's still warm, but there's not as many magenta tones in there. So I was a little bit more pleased with this look. You can see I went a bit more toward the warm tones in the temperature. And then I brought this down just a touch toward green to get away from that magenta. So there's off and there's on, off and on. And then the last one is a corrector. So if you look real closely in this area, I felt like I wanted to get rid of those magenta tones a little bit more, and I wanted it to be more of just that metal color. If we come into the curves page, and then I click saturation versus saturation, you can see I did this little curve so that in the dark areas or the lift area of the image, I can get rid of that magenta. So there's still a little bit there. I brought this little thing down, and there you go. Pretty nice looking image in my opinion. So this is everything off. That's the original image. And this is everything on. In my opinion, none of this is like crazy adjustments. It's just little tweaks here and there. This is probably the biggest one, actually getting it into the correct color space. And then it's just adjustments from there. All right, so now we're going to step back to this woman right here. Luckily, we actually have what this is right here. The camera is an Arri Alexa. This was shot in log C, ProRes 4444, etc. It's ungraded. So I'm going to turn this off. And my adjustments to this are very, 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 very simple. So we have this first node right here. So it's literally just a node. I didn't touch it at all. I didn't do anything. And then this next one, I just changed the color space. So if I go up to effects and I have color space on it, You can look, I picked area Alexa, the input gamma is log C, and then we changed it to the industry standard Rec 709. This is just a color space. If you look at a color chart, which I can throw up on the screen for you. So I'm going to close effects. Literally no adjustments to the primary wheels. No, none of these. I didn't do anything. All I did was get this into the proper color space. So you can see it was very flat. I put the proper color space on it and boom. It's a pretty good looking image. And essentially what a color space correction or a LUT, a lookup table, is doing is it's getting your image as close to what the camera was seeing on the day of your video shoot. In a sense, this is probably really close to what it looked like on the outside of the camera the day whoever shot this did this shoot. This is less of a color correction that I'm going to show you for this one and more of some cool tools that I think could be beneficial for you to use in your normal shooting. So the first one I did here is I softened her face. I just turned this on, and if you look real closely, all I'm doing is softening her face, which this could be very helpful for you to use depending on the individual you're shooting or whatever, and if you need to do some softening. You have to be careful not to do too much of this, but I would like to show you how I did it. There's a couple steps. The first step is you have to select the qualifier. So what I'm actually going to do first is reset this. I'm going to reset that node so there's nothing on it. I'm going to come down here to the qualifier, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag it around her face. So I'm going to go to a brighter area and then a slightly darker area. So I'm going to click and drag and just in there. And now these have set up qualifiers. So it's the area of her face that's being selected in the luminance, saturation, and hue. It doesn't really look like anything changed. Well, what you're going to do is you're going to come up to here and you're going to click highlight. And now this is showing you only what this is selected. So we're going to fine tune this. As I click and drag this around, it kind of selects different areas of her face. So we don't want any more than, so that's too much. So I'm going to go back a little bit. And what I'm going to do is you can drag these left and right, and it's going to adjust those particular areas. So like for instance, the luminance. You also have these other wheels, so it softens the output, the in and out of this selection. Before I fine tune all this, I want to make sure that this only her face is selected instead of these other areas of the image. So the best way to do that is to go to a window. So we're going to click window. We're going to create a circle. We're going to put this circle right over her face, and we're going to click these inside blue circles, and we're going to drag it down. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. We're going to drag it down a little bit and just kind of size it to her face. And then these outside circles adjust the softness or the fade of the selection. So now if we click off of this, you can see instead of the whole image being selected, it's only around her face. And I haven't even made any adjustments to the actual qualifier yet. So now that we have that set, before we finish the cleanup, so we get rid of all these extra little dots and we only have our face selected, we're going to go back to this window. So I'm pretty happy with where the selection is. I'm going to head over to the tracker. Because we're shooting video, there's a good chance that whatever you're trying to adjust is moving. To keep this window on here, we're going to use Davinci Resolve's really powerful tracker. So I'm at the first frame of this window, and I'm going to hit the play button or the track forward button. And what this is going to do is it's going to track this entire clip, and it's going to get this window that we created, the circle, to stay on her face. So let's do that. I'm going to click the button, and you see it go through, and it's created all these dots. So now if I move this around, you can see that the window, she doesn't move much because it's a very short clip, but you can see that this window stays on her face. And it looks weird right now, but if you go back up here and you click this button, it'll turn it off. But we want to stay in this because we want to finesse and fine tune this adjustment. So now you have the matte finesse. And there's a lot of stuff you can do on here, but we're going to stick on page one. And really when it comes down to it, you're just going to have to mess around with this and figure out what's best for your image. So I want to go through real quick and make some adjustments. You can see a lot of this has been adjusted, and I'm pretty happy with this selection. I don't want this up here, so I'm going to go back to my power window and bring this in just a touch. Bring this in. So, and you could go in here and you could really fine tune this, but just for the sake of what I'm trying to do, I think this is going to be fine. I'm not actually changing any colors. I'm just adding some softness to her face. So why did we do all this? Well, we did all this because on this next page over here, which is blur, we're not going to introduce some softness to her face. And there's two ways you could do this. You could either add blur. So in this radius area, I'm just going to drag this up or down. So you can either make a person look older by adding sharpness, or and just hit Command Z, or you can drag it up and soften. I think what the better way, and this looks a little bit better, is to use the mid or detail. So if you drag it up, again, you're going to sharpen. If you drag it down, you'll soften. In my opinion, the way this dial works, it just seems like the soften looks much better than the actual blur on this page. So we're going to undo that because it's way too much. We're just going to do it just enough where you can see a little bit of a difference, but I want to take it too far. So let me zoom in here. If I turn this on and off, you can see it's not a lot, but it softens a little bit and it really helps a lot. Because of the way this scene is lit, you can tell that her eye is a bit dark. So I'm actually going to bring the brightness up on her eye just a little bit. And this is pretty much done the same way we did the face. You're going to have a window. So I put a window on her eye. You're going to track her eye, which I already tracked it. I added a little bit of brightness. So if you look in this area right here, these two, I brought the brightness up a little bit. That small amount brings a little more attention to her eye. This is a new tool I got for Christmas. So I figured, hey, why not use it for some color grading? Now this is essentially everything I've done in these 4 nodes, but in just one node. I want to show you some very simple, different ways to do the same thing. So I'm going to turn everything off. What I did to start is adjust the white balance. Now, this is something you need to be able to do, or should probably try to do in camera. My shot is already very, very close to accurate white balance. So I'm going to turn this on. And to be honest with you, it doesn't really look like anything happens. But if you look down here, you can see a very, 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 very slight adjustment to the tint and temperature. I selected this tool and I clicked in just a white area of the Ryobi. So that's like really important when it comes to getting a good looking image out of your camera, no matter what camera you have. Now on my second one, you can see I did some adjustments to the exposure. So I'm calling this levels, but essentially this area right here. I brought the midtones up a little bit. I brought the highlights up a little bit, and I just touched the lift or the darks. In this way, the exposure is much closer to 100% than it was before. Once I did my exposure, you can see that the image doesn't look bad, but it just needs more contrast. So I brought more contrast into the next one. So let me turn that on. So now you can see it went from somewhat of a flat looking image to now there's more color. Darks are darker, the brights are brighter, and just it's starting to look like something. All I did with this is I adjusted the contrast and then I moved some of these around just a little bit. The last one is saturation and just a little bit of finishing. So down here, I brought my saturation up to 57. So that just brings a little bit more color in there. You can see there's more color in the background. The greenish yellow pops just slightly more, not too much. And this would be essentially anything else I wanted to do to this. In my opinion, now the image looks pretty good, right? It went from an image that was okay. There's not, the color's a little dull. And now just making a couple little adjustments has brought it to this really nice looking image. Now let me show you this. I'm going to turn all these off and I'm going to turn this one on. It's pretty close to the same thing, yet for the most part, all of these adjustments are on one node. Let's say I have shot 10 shots in a little sequence of this exact same thing and nothing changed on the set where I was actually shooting. So the camera settings are the same, the lighting settings are the same. Everything should be exactly the same. This will be a pain in the butt to have to do 10 times. But what you can do is if you open up this button over here, Gallery, you can right click this and hit Grab Still. And what that does is it creates a still image or a picture of this. It creates essentially a template. And now I'm not going to do it. I could go in here and select all of them, right? Highlight them all like that. I could right click and I could hit Apply Grade. Now this adjustment that I did will be applied to all the clips. I'm going to turn this off and I'm going to turn these other 4 on. These are all things that I use on almost a daily basis when I'm making videos. You have all these tools at your disposal, and there's so many more that I did not go over, and you could definitely use them too. And the way I've learned a lot over the years is just getting into a program and clicking buttons and seeing what things do. This is another layer, and what I did with this layer is I added a vignette. Now, if you've ever heard of a vignette before, you've probably seen it. But essentially, it's a black circle that has been inverted to make the edges of your screen darker. So I'm going to turn it on and off. There's off, and this is on. So usually, you want it to be very subtle. And the way I did this is similar to the eye and the face. I made another node. I came down here, and I created a window, and I stretch it out. And this is the main circle. And then this is the softness of that circle. And I just stretched it out. And then I came over here and I brought down my darker areas of the image in this clip. So let me turn this off. So this is a way for you to see what's actually happening. So we're doing a power window. So you can see the power window. I'm going to turn that off so we can see the image. And again, I'm just turning this on and off. And that's literally how simple it is to make this. The last thing I'm going to show you. Sometimes you film things and you need to blur a particular part of the image out. And I have done this countless times with different things. So if I click on this last one, I'm going to turn this on real quick. And you can see in here that now there's blur. All I did, I created a square power window. You can see that I did it over the image and I didn't soften it much. I just made sure it fit over this. Once I had that done, I went over to the tracker and I made sure that I tracked this because this image is moving. It's very slight, but it is moving. And I wanted to make sure that this stayed where this was because it needs to only be on this. I don't want it anywhere else in the image. So once it was tracked and set in place, then I came over to this tab, which is blur. You can either drag this up or you can drag one of these to the right and you can see on the image that it blurs. So I turn that up and now, just like if you see on TV or whatever, you have this blur. And this is a great way of making sure that certain parts of an image do not come through.